Yeah, my name is Adeem Maria. I perform songs as Adeem the artist. I'm a seventh generation North Carolinian, so I've been in and of the American South for about as long as there have been white people there, which is not a brag. And I make American country and folk music. I mean, I write music for a variety of reasons. I think the reason I say I make both country and folk is because I see these as both traditions which are tied directly to working class people. And country music, I think, is more in the lightening the load of the laborer, whereas folk music is more concerned with systemic changes to embolden the power of the laborer and create a more equitable situation and symbiotic collaboration between laborer and employer. I think that, with that said, I do a lot of work through the cultural lens to exhume kind of story, the unwanted stories of the South. I try to take my sounds from a lot of older country music and folk music, but also I like to think it's imbued with quite a bit of whimsy, and that is more of the country aspect of things. I think it's really important, if you're going to handle the severity of life, that you be willing to mock it and laugh at it and be silly about it all at the same time. And so I like to think that I have a really deep reverence for everything that usually expresses itself in the form of a committed irreverence. I was born in North Carolina. I was born in the rural South in a town called Gastonia, and then I grew up. I went to a K-12 school until I was in 5th grade. That is to say, you graduate high school with kids who were in kindergarten. You're in the same all the way up. And I moved to New York. My family relocated up there. And I was always kind of an outsider in the South because I was a weird kind of punk, goth, hip-hop loving kid. I had long blonde hair. They called me Goldilocks. And when I moved to New York, I had this accent. And so up there was not a lot of context for who I was. So then I had to be considered kind of a good old boy or a redneck. And that was really difficult because in the South, nobody clocked me that way. And so going through those, there was a strong sense of assimilation. I got rid of my accent. I spent years doctoring my voice so that I would not have any hint of an accent, so that when I spoke to people, I articulated cogently and effectively, And then when I come back, and then I'd call my dad and I'd get out the phone and I'd be like, honey, what are we having for dinner? And she'd be like, were you talking to your dad again? Because God damn it, like you sound like a banjo right now. And so I started doing, folk music very seriously and very intentionally then, and I considered myself a folk artist from New York. I wanted to be seen as sophisticated, intelligent. I was very ashamed of the fact that, like, my parents met at a gas station and had a one-night stand, and then I grew up as a little hillbilly in a trailer park. That was not the image of, like, the sophisticated, worldly, sort of expansive humanitarian person that I wanted to be. I liked the idea that I was a New Yorker who was a folk artist who created these things. And then I moved back down to Tennessee and continued being a folk artist from New York and Tennessee. I was not very successful with this, and went through several changes exploring religious ideology. So yeah, coming back to the South was really important for me, but also really disorienting because it meant going through the same experience that I had before, where now I was kind of a northerner in the South, and it was very jarring, but also there's something about the South that has always been very comforting to me. And I think during the years that preceded moving back, there were a lot of ways in which I began to parse the abuse I experienced from my father, the abuse I experienced from my mother, the abuse I experienced from the culture that I grew up in, and was able to begin to separate that from the South as a construct. You know what I mean? The South was not only racism, it was also Martin Luther King Jr. The South was not only, xenophobia, it was also cornbread and good beans. There were like things about where I grew up, there are things about where I live, the mountains, streams, fishing, and, there's so many beautiful things about Appalachian culture and about the rural South that were given to me, you know, these sort of ancestral things that I find a lot of beauty in. And I think that act, there is a kinship between that and what happens to me with Christianity as well, where there is a sort of understanding of like, okay, this is who I am, and this is where I'm from, and this is the story that I was born into. And what my life's purpose ultimately comes down to is figuring out what my relationship is to the stories that I was born into. I am creating jewelry for the mind that is endowed with a more expansive vision. I am creating a more expansive version of country music. I am encouraging people to look beyond the scope of who they are. I'm standing in opposition to xenophobia and bigotry and things that have been sort of, well, country music's been a harbinger and a vehicle for these types of ideologies for a long time. And so it can seem like activism, just being a queer person, just standing in opposition to bigoted values, just using my pronouns is considered an act of political protest, but it isn't. It's my identity is politicized, but that does not make me an activist by default. That is my position on this. And there are other people in the music industry who are doing the same thing I am, and they consider themselves activists, and I'm not speaking out against them. This is my personal, like, any work that I do to deconstruct and dismantle the systemic white supremacy that exists within these structures is out of a sense of serious obligation as an ancestral inheritant of the people who made those structures. So to call myself a hero in any way seems very silly. I'm working very hard at restitution for the harm my my people have caused. That's what this is to me. So I don't see myself through that lens. It's less that I find it offensive for myself. I would be honored to be an activist, but I think I'm too selfish for that kind of work. I like playing my guitar and drinking beer at 11 o'clock in the morning. It's not activist work. It's not that I don't want to be called one, it's that I don't think that it's correct. You know what I mean? I don't take any umbrage with it. I just don't think it's accurate. In fact, I find it to be a little disrespectful to my friends who are actual activists, who are actually putting themselves in riskier situations than me with more intense terms and more on the line, you know? The journalists who lost their lives in Gaza trying to report on the genocide, they're activists. They are people who have compromised the safety of their lives in order to speak truth to power in a way that is direct and confrontational. I am an entertainer who is trying to do the right thing where I can in entertainment. So I consider myself more akin to the Dolly Partons of the world. Part of what people conflate with activism in my work is this commitment to saying, we're not going to perpetuate the lie anymore, because we don't have to. White people think, I'm afraid to look at my ancestry because what if I find out I own slaves? This is a thought. What would I do? And it's like, well, you have to fucking make it right, buddy. It doesn't change the fact, like, whether you know or not doesn't change if it happened. And if it happened, it is on you. That's what it is. And so for me, there was not a sense that, like, if I look into my genealogy and my ancestry and I find that my great-great-grandparents owned slaves, that makes me a bad person or is an indictment on me. It was, okay, if I find that out, then I know where the work begins. And I think that if we could all kind of see this as like, and some of this is just Americans are really, really indoctrinated with the concept of one life, your life, you get to lead it, your story, be whatever you want to be. Do you know what I mean? Which, I mean, you know, I'm not degrading any of this. It's all beautiful, but it's beautiful when it's married to some sense of greater civic responsibility, and that deals with, like, understanding the role that you're born into and the stories you're born into. And so I think that if we could, rather than hide from the things we're afraid of, confront them directly, and then try to understand how to live meaningfully into those realities. You know, how do I carry the reality that, like, I have caused harm? How do I carry the reality that in my marriage, I have acted as an abuser? As a parent, I have acted as an abuser. That's the framework for the world that I was taught and inhabited. And I need therapy to process that and deconstruct those and create new patterns. That's how we are. That's what's going on. We're all informed by these toxic things that we need to address, that we need to dismantle, that we need to deconstruct and reimagine and rebuild. And it's hard. It's hard. And it requires so much humility and vulnerability and curiosity and frailty with the other. And during times like these where everyone is so afraid of violence and so afraid of tyranny because it is so prevalent and so crushing, it becomes really, really tough to get people to willingly be vulnerable and lead with curiosity, because there's so much need to protect ourselves, you know? I liked the idea of being a folk musician from New York in the same way that white people want to be a white person whose family didn't own slaves. I wanted it because it was a compelling story that felt meaningful to me, and it felt like the only way to access being a sophisticated, thoughtful person. And when I found, you know, especially as a parent, I began to reflect on fatherhood, on manhood, on parenthood, on all these things. And it led me to my father, to the way that I grew up. It led me to country music. And what I found in country music when I re-examined it, especially through the lens of Guy Clark and Johnny Cash and James McMurtry, and Lucinda Williams and Iris DeMent and Loretta Lynn, was this Tanya Tucker, was a really incisive look at gender, actually. Country music to me felt suddenly like it was all it was about was gender in some ways. It was about what it meant to be a woman navigating the American South and what it meant to be a man navigating the American South and what types of things men do and what types of things women do. And so I think in many ways, it was like finding out that my ancestors were Confederates, and trying to decide, what does that mean for me? And I think what it meant for me was, okay, this is a genre of music that I think is actually doing more than most genres to explore gender, which is the thing that I'm most interested in, but it's doing it through the most myopic and pedantic and elementary lens I can imagine. So what if I tried to, seeing as I am someone who is so fascinated with the idea of gender and gender expression and identity on a kind of a global scale, use country music as a sort of vehicle for exploring that in a way that breaks those gender norms and also speaks to the non-reality of what it means to be a man and a woman. It's a non-reality, you know. People think that by saying I'm non-binary, I'm saying I'm a secret third gender. I'm not. I'm disavowing the idea that there is anything inherent in being a man or a woman that makes you unique in this way from the other. You are all of us. We are combinations of estrogen and testosterone and chromosomes and all these different things, and they all exist in different levels in all of us that create all of us a sort of uniqueness, whether we are born men or born female, you know, whether our gender assigned at birth to us or our sex assigned at birth, there's this greater sense of who are you. And that's a question that we're working out in America, and we're working out in Denmark, and we're working out in Sweden, and we're working out in Israel. You know, in different ways and sometimes violent ways, and it affects all of us. We ready? My name's Adeem, and this is a song called Hallelujah, Eggs and Bacon. I flushed a handful of foreign objects in a Peruvian restroom stall. Told the attendant in the station and waited while the police were called. Hallelujah, eggs and bacon. I wanna live like I'm on vacation. Morning glory till the day's end, when the best hard rhymes are taken. Faking accent, let the past slip through to the present. It's an easy accident. God of mercy, I hope we make it. I wanna live like I'm on vacation. I wanna live like I'm on vacation. I wanna live like there's no real danger out there. No famine or panic or psychological warfare. There's no chemical spills or closeted deals between our war criminal representatives in Israel. What if there were no dead children, only stillness? Listless listeners, we drink our fill. This hate for justice is numbed by patient. God, I wanna live like I'm on vacation. God of mercy, it's fun to fake it. I wanna live like I'm on vacation. I wanna live like I'm on vacation.